It's okay. You're safe here.
I'm scared.
I know, I'm right here with you.
Okay.
Team, we have a situation. Move to lockdown positions.
What about the medical wing?
Secure it. Let's move.
What would you do if the one skill you buried to survive was the only thing standing between a child and death, and using it meant the past you ran from would finally catch you? The waiting room at Ridgeline General smelled like burnt coffee and rain-soaked coats. A boy named Eli Thompson sat between his mother's knees, his lips turning a shade of blue no 7-year-old should ever wear. Nurses called for a doctor. None came fast enough. A security guard reached for a radio he did not know how to use for something like this. Then Nora Vance, the charge nurse everyone thought they knew, dropped to the floor beside him and reached into her scrub pocket for something no hospital had ever trained her to carry. Her hands did not shake. Her eyes did not blink. She worked like someone built for one purpose only, and in less than a minute Eli was breathing again. Across the room, 7 men in tactical gear who had walked in for an entirely different reason went still. They recognized the movement before they recognized her face. Only one kind of person moves like that under pressure, and by nightfall that recognition would tear Nora's quiet life apart. She thought she had buried that person 5 years ago, in a locked box under her floorboard and a name she no longer answered to in her sleep. She was wrong. And the men watching her from across the waiting room already knew it. If you're just joining us, hit subscribe so you don't miss where this story goes, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one and I would love to say hello to you personally. Now let's go back to where it all started 12 hours before that ambulance ever left the station. Nora Vance had built her life around being forgettable. 5 years ago she chose Ridgeline General because it was small, underfunded, and far from anywhere anyone would look for her. She worked 12-hour shifts, drank her coffee black, and never once mentioned the years she spent overseas. Her coworkers knew her as the nurse who never panicked. They joked that she had ice in her veins. They had no idea how close to the truth that joke actually was. Every morning she ran 6 miles before sunrise, alone, along the river trail behind her apartment. It was the only hour of the day that still belonged to the woman she used to be. She counted her breaths the way she had been taught long ago, for in, for out, a rhythm meant to keep a soldier calm when everything around her was not. The trail wound past an old railroad bridge and a stretch of pines where the fog sat low most mornings. Nora liked that stretch best. Nobody else ran there that early. Nobody watched her. "You're early again," said Priya Malhotra, the young ER resident, as Nora clocked in before her shift technically started. "Old habit," Nora said, tying back her hair. "One day you'll tell me where that habit came from." "One day," Nora said, and left it there, the way she always did. "You always say that," Priya said, grinning as she flipped through a stack of charts. "One day is never going to come if you keep pushing it back." "Maybe never is fine," Nora said, though something in her voice softened the joke into something more honest than either of them acknowledged out loud. Priya laughed it off the way she always did too. Neither of them knew that day was closer than either could imagine. Nora's apartment held almost nothing personal. A framed photo of her parents taken before they passed, back when she still called home more than once a year. A stack of medical journals stacked by height on a shelf she had built herself. A locked metal box under the floorboard that she had not opened in 3 years, holding a set of dog tags that no longer had a name she used, a folded photograph with the corners worn soft, and a medal she never applied for and never wanted. She told herself the box stayed locked because that part of her life was finished. Some nights, staring at the ceiling, she wondered if it was finished or simply waiting. At work, Nora was known for something else too, a stillness that made even the most senior doctors quietly defer to her in a crisis. Nobody asked why a floor nurse carried herself like she had once given orders in far more dangerous rooms than an emergency ward. Nobody asked because Nora never gave anyone a reason to ask twice. She liked the anonymity. She liked being just Nora, the nurse who remembered every patient's name and brought soup to the ones who had no family visiting. She liked knowing which patients were scared of needles and which ones just wanted someone to sit with them for 5 extra minutes. What she did not like, what she never let herself dwell on, was the unit she left behind in the mountains outside Damascus, the 6 soldiers who trusted her with their lives, and the ambush that took every one of them except her. She told herself she survived because she was skilled. Some nights she believed it was because she was the one they meant to leave alive, as a message to whoever came looking. That morning, like every other morning, she believed the life she had built was solid ground. She checked her patients one by one, updated charts, refilled a water pitcher for an elderly man in bed 6 who thanked her twice for it, and moved through her shift with the calm rhythm she had practiced for 5 years straight. Around noon, a first-year nursing student named Callum shadowed her for an hour, nervous and eager, asking rapid questions about triage priorities. Nora answered each one patiently, remembering a version of herself who had once asked the same kinds of questions in a very different classroom, one with far fewer textbooks and far more consequences for getting an answer wrong. "How do you stay so calm when things get bad?" Callum asked, watching her reset a dislocated finger without a flicker of hesitation. "You breathe," Nora said simply. "You breathe and you let your hands remember what your mind is too scared to think about." Callum wrote that down in his notebook like it was something out of a textbook. Nora almost laughed. It was the truest thing anyone had taught her, whispered to her once by a field instructor half a world away, long before either of them knew how much that lesson would eventually cost. Lunch break came and went the way it always did, a hurried sandwich eaten standing up at the nurse's station, half her attention still on the monitors behind her. She traded small talk with the janitorial staff, complimented a coworker's new haircut, and signed off on a supply order for the third floor without really thinking about any of it. This was the rhythm she had built brick by brick for 5 years, ordinary, steady, unremarkable, and she had learned to love it the way a person learns to love silence after a very loud life. In the early afternoon, an elderly veteran named Harold came in for a routine checkup, and Nora sat with him longer than her schedule technically allowed, listening to him talk about his years in the service decades earlier. He never asked about her past and she never offered it, but there was an understanding between them that needed no words, the kind two people carrying similar weight recognize in each other without ever naming it out loud. "You've got a soldier's eyes," Harold told her once, months earlier, apropos of nothing. Nora had only smiled and changed the subject, the way she always did, and Harold had never brought it up again, respecting the boundary without needing an explanation for it. Later that morning, a car accident victim arrived by ambulance, a young construction worker named Diego with a broken leg and a laceration across his forehead. Nora assisted the attending physician, holding steady pressure on the wound while Diego gritted his teeth through the pain, cracking nervous jokes about his terrible luck. "Guess I picked the wrong week to skip my vitamins," he said, wincing as the doctor examined his leg. Nora laughed despite the tension in the room, the kind of laugh that came easily and honestly, unweighted by anything she was hiding. "You're going to be just fine," she told him, and meant it, the same steady certainty in her voice that she gave every patient, regardless of what she carried underneath it. Diego seemed to relax slightly at her tone, the particular calm she carried into every room settling something nervous in him the same way it had settled 100 other frightened patients before him. It was a small moment in an ordinary shift, one of hundreds she had lived through in the last 5 years, unremarkable except that it was, in its own quiet way, exactly the kind of life she had once been certain she did not deserve to have. Some mornings she still woke up surprised to find herself allowed to have it at all. Later, restocking the trauma cart in Bay 3, she overheard 2 younger nurses talking near the supply room, unaware she was close enough to hear them. "She's been here 5 years and nobody actually knows anything about her," one of them said, not unkindly, simply curious the way new staff often were. "No family that visits, no stories about where she's from, nothing." "Maybe some people just like their privacy," the other replied with a shrug, and the conversation moved on to something else entirely, forgotten by both of them within minutes. Nora stood very still behind the supply room door for a moment longer than necessary, the words settling somewhere quiet and familiar inside her. She had built this exact kind of quiet distance on purpose, brick by brick, shift by shift, and hearing it described so plainly by strangers who meant no harm by it landed heavier than she expected. She finished restocking the cart, tucked the moment away with everything else she carried alone, and returned to her rounds as though she had heard nothing at all. That afternoon, as she wheeled him back toward the waiting area, she caught herself hoping, quietly and without reason, that whatever ordinary day was left to her would stay exactly this ordinary a while longer. It would not. During her 30-minute break, Nora sat alone in the small courtyard behind the cafeteria, eating a plain granola bar and watching pigeons squabble over crumbs near the fountain. She thought, not for the first time, about calling her sister, the only living relative who still occasionally left voicemails asking whether she was eating enough and whether she had made any friends in this new city yet. She had not called her sister back in 11 months. It was not anger between them, only distance, the kind Nora had built carefully around every relationship that survived Damascus, close enough to seem normal from the outside, far enough that no one could be hurt if her past ever came knocking. She typed a text message to her sister that afternoon, deleted it, typed it again, and finally sent a short version. "Thinking of you. Miss you. Talk soon." It felt small and insufficient against 11 months of silence, but it felt, also, like the first crack of light through a door she had kept shut far too long. Her sister replied within minutes. "Miss you too. Call me when you can. I still have your old room ready whenever you want it." Nora read the message twice, put her phone away and returned to her shift with something unfamiliar sitting quietly in her chest. Something close to hope, though she did not yet have a name for it. By the end of that same shift, she would learn that solid ground was only ever alone, and the interest on it had finally come due. The waiting room was packed by mid-afternoon, the way it always got on a Friday. Flu season, a car accident on Route 9, and a toddler with a broken wrist all competed for the same 4 doctors. Eli Thompson had come in with his mother for what looked like a routine allergic reaction to a peanut snack at school. Within 20 minutes it turned into something else entirely. His throat closed. His skin went pale, then gray, then a deep frightening blue around his lips. His mother, Danielle, felt him go rigid in her arms and screamed for help before she even understood what was happening. "Somebody help him," she cried, cradling his small body as he clawed at his own collar, gasping for air that would not come. The triage nurse froze, her hand hovering over the desk phone. A security guard reached for his radio, unsure who to even call. An intake doctor was 3 floors up, tied up in a code that would not release him in time. Nora was walking past with a stack of charts when she heard the sound. Not the scream. The absence of sound after it, the terrible silence of a child who cannot cry because he cannot breathe at all. Something in her switched on that she had spent 5 years trying to switch off. She dropped the charts. She was on her knees beside Eli before anyone else in the room understood what was happening. "Anaphylaxis, full obstruction, he's got seconds," she said, her voice flat and fast, the voice of someone who had said sentences like this in rooms far worse than a hospital lobby. "Get me a 14 gauge and antihistamine now," she barked at Priya, who had come running the moment she heard commotion by the front desk. But there was no time to wait for supplies from the cart. Nora reached into the inner pocket of her scrubs and pulled out a small emergency kit she had carried, unopened, every single shift for 5 years. A kit no hospital had issued her. A kit built by habits she never let go of completely, restocked in private on her own time, never once mentioned to anyone. Her hands moved with a precision that did not belong to a floor nurse. She tilted Eli's head, found the exact point on his throat by feel rather than sight, and performed an emergency airway procedure with a speed and confidence that silenced the entire room. 10 seconds. 15. The boy's chest rose. Color rushed back into his lips like a tide coming in. "There you go," Nora whispered, so quietly only Eli could hear it. "Breathe with me, buddy. You're safe now." Eli's small hand found hers and gripped it, and for a second the entire waiting room, the beeping monitors, the crying patients, the ringing phones, all of it faded into a narrow, familiar tunnel Nora knew from years ago, a place where nothing existed except the person in front of her and the next thing she had to do to keep them alive. "Good boy," she said. "You did great. You're the bravest kid in this whole building." The waiting room erupted into relieved chaos, doctors finally arriving to take over, Eli's mother sobbing with gratitude, nurses clapping, a passing janitor pausing his mop to wipe his own eyes. "How did you know exactly where to?" Priya started, staring at Nora's hands still slick from the procedure. "Instinct," Nora said, cutting her off gently, already reaching for gloves to change. "Get him to pediatrics for observation. He'll want ice cream after this. Promise him some." Priya laughed despite herself, shaken and impressed in equal measure, and hurried to help wheel Eli's gurney toward the elevators. Nora stood, wiped her hands and reached for the stack of charts she had dropped, already trying to disappear back into the ordinary version of herself, the way she had done 100 times before whenever her training slipped through the cracks of her civilian life. She did not notice at first the group of men near the emergency doors who had not moved, who had not spoken, who were staring at her the way hunters stare at a track they were not expecting to find. It was only when she finally looked up, chart in hand, that she felt it, 7 pairs of eyes locked on her with an intensity that had nothing to do with a stranger's gratitude. Her stomach dropped. Some part of her that had never truly gone quiet whispered a single word she had not let herself think in years. Compromised. She forced herself to walk, not run, toward the nurse's station, counting her own footsteps the way she once counted paces on patrol, a habit meant to keep panic from turning into mistakes. Behind the desk, she busied her hands with paperwork that suddenly felt like a prop in a play she no longer fully controlled. Danielle Thompson found her 20 minutes later, still shaking with relief, and wrapped Nora in a hug so sudden and fierce that it nearly undid the calm mask Nora had spent the last half-hour rebuilding. "I don't know how to thank you," Danielle said, tears still wet on her cheeks. "You didn't hesitate. Not for 1 second. That's the job, Nora said gently, though her eyes flicked once briefly toward the men still stationed near the doors. Go be with your son. He's going to want his mom more than he wants me. Danielle squeezed her hand once more before hurrying toward the elevators, and Nora allowed herself exactly 3 seconds to feel the good warm relief of a life saved before her training pulled her attention firmly back toward the exits, the cameras, and the 7 men who had not moved an inch since Eli took his first full breath. The hospital's administrator, a tightly wounded man named Mr. Feldman, called Nora into his office before her shift ended, a printed still image from the security footage already sitting on his desk. This is not standard hospital procedure, he said, tapping the image with one finger. Where exactly did a charge nurse learn to perform a field airway procedure with a non-issued instrument? I learned it a long time ago, Nora said carefully. It saved that boy's life. I'd do it again in the same situation without hesitating. I'm not questioning the outcome, Feldman said, softening slightly under the weight of her steady gaze. I'm questioning the method. Legal is going to want an explanation, and so, frankly, will I. Put whatever explanation you need on paper, Nora said. I'll sign it. But that boy is alive right now because I didn't wait for the hospital procedure to catch up to what he needed. Feldman studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his frustration into something closer to reluctant respect. Off the record, he finally said, good work today, Nurse Vance. On the record, please try not to make a habit of terrifying our legal department. Nora almost smiled on her way out of his office, though the reprieve was short-lived. She had barely reached the hallway before she felt, once again, the weight of 7 pairs of eyes she could no longer pretend she hadn't noticed. In pediatrics, Eli was sitting up in bed, an oxygen monitor clipped gently to his finger, a stack of coloring books scattered across his blanket. His mother had stepped out briefly to call his father with the news, leaving him alone for a few minutes with a nurse he clearly trusted completely. Are you a superhero? Eli asked seriously the moment Nora walked in to check his vitals. Because superheroes always pretend to be regular people until someone needs saving. Nora laughed softly, adjusting his blanket. I'm just a nurse, bud. That's exactly what a superhero would say, Eli said, entirely satisfied with his own logic, and went back to coloring with the confident certainty only a 7-year-old could manage. Nora sat with him a few extra minutes longer than her rounds required, watching him color a picture of a hospital with a bright yellow sun over it, and let herself feel, just for a moment, the simple good of an ordinary shift that had somehow also saved a life. She did not yet know how completely that single ordinary act was about to unravel every careful thing she had built. Down the hall, Priya caught up with her near the supply closet, still buzzing with adrenaline from the afternoon. I've been doing this for 2 years and I've never seen anything like that, she said, half awe, half genuine concern. Where did you learn to move like that, Nora? Really? Continuing education, Nora said, the joke landing lighter than she felt saying it. I'm serious, Priya pressed gently, no accusation in her voice, only curiosity and a little worry. That wasn't nursing school. That was something else entirely. Nora considered, for one brief unguarded second, telling her the truth, or at least a piece of it. The impulse surprised her almost as much as it scared her. She had not felt the pull to be known by someone in a very long time. Someday, she said instead, the same word she gave everyone, though this time it felt less like a wall and more like a promise she might actually intend to keep. I promise you'll be the first to know when I'm ready to tell you. Priya studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly, accepting the answer without pushing further, the same quiet trust she had extended to Nora for 2 years running. Okay, she said simply. Someday then. I'll hold you to it. Marcus Cade had walked into Ridgeline General for one reason only, to check on a wounded contact hiding 2 floors up under a false name. He had not expected to see a rare, dangerous technique performed in the middle of a public lobby. He watched Nora's hands. I watched the angle of her wrist. Watched the exact way she counted silently under her breath before making the incision, a rhythm drilled into a person only through years of live-fire training, not a nursing certificate. Sergeant, one of his men said quietly, leaning close so only Marcus could hear, that's not hospital training. No, Marcus said, eyes still fixed on Nora. It isn't. He had spent 3 years searching for a woman the intelligence community had listed as killed in action. Every lead had gone cold. Every trail had dried up somewhere between a burned safehouse in Turkey and a rumor that never checked out in Greece. He had almost given up believing she was alive. Now she was standing 20 feet away from him in scrubs and sneakers, calmly organizing patient charts as if she had not just proven she was exactly who he thought she was. He did not approach her yet. Men like Marcus did not walk into a public space and blow 5 years of someone's careful hiding in front of witnesses. He had learned patience the hard way in worse rooms than this one, watching good operators die because someone moved a step too early. Instead, he watched her for the rest of the afternoon from a distance, memorizing her routine, her exits, the people she trusted, the way she checked the room twice before sitting anywhere. Old instincts recognizing older instincts. He noted the young resident who called her by first name and laughed easily around her. He noted the elderly patient in bed 6 who lit up when Nora walked past. He noted, too, that Nora never once sat with her back to a door. What he did not know was that Nora had already clocked him too. She had felt the eyes on her the second she stood up from Eli's side. Old instincts, ones she thought had gone dormant, came roaring back to life the way a fire alarm does after months of silence, sudden and impossible to ignore. By the time her shift reached its final hour, she had identified all 7 of them, their positions near the exits, the slight bulges beneath their jackets that were not wallets, and 2 possible exit routes they had not fully covered. She had also identified something else, something that eased the tightest part of her fear even as the rest of it stayed sharp. These were not enemy operators moving to eliminate a target. Enemy operators did not stand still and stare. They moved fast, quiet, and final, in and out before anyone noticed a threat had even entered the building. These men were watching. Waiting. Which meant, in Nora's experience, they wanted something from her before they decided what came next. And that single distinction was the only reason she had not already slipped out through the loading dock and vanished from the city entirely. She walked to the staff locker room with her pulse steady and her mind sorting through 5 years of buried training in seconds. Whatever door she had just cracked open, there was no closing it again. She had learned that lesson once already in Damascus, and it had cost her everything she loved. In the mirror above the sink, she looked at her own reflection and, for the first time in 5 years, saw the soldier looking back instead of the nurse. She studied the woman in the glass for a long moment, half expecting the reflection to blink first. It did not. Outside, in the parking structure across the street, Marcus gathered his men into a tight circle beneath a stairwell where the security cameras did not reach. "Nobody makes contact until I say so," he told them. "She spent 5 years surviving without any of us. She won't respond well to being cornered." "With respect, Sergeant," said a younger operator named Reyes, "if she really is who you think she is, she just put herself on every hostile watch list in this hemisphere in under a minute. We don't exactly have 5 years to ease her back in." "I'm aware," Marcus said, jaw tight. "Which is exactly why we do this carefully. Ward trusted her with his life for 4 years. I'm not going to be the reason that trust gets thrown away over bad timing." Reyes held up both hands in surrender, but the concern did not leave his face. Marcus understood it. Every hour they waited was an hour the syndicate's own people had to make the same discovery his team had already made in that waiting room. He watched Nora's shift end through the tinted windows of a parked van 2 blocks away, timing her exit, the position of every hospital camera, the exact second the loading dock light clicked on for the evening. When she finally stepped outside into the light rain, he moved. Inside the van, Reyes kept his eyes on a second monitor entirely, one feeding from a different source altogether, a private channel the team had tapped days earlier while chasing a lead on the same syndicate. A message scrolled across the screen in coded shorthand, flagged urgent, originating from a number Reyes recognized instantly. "Sergeant, you're going to want to see this before you talk to her," he called out, but Marcus was already crossing the street, and the message would have to wait until after the conversation. None of them could afford to delay any longer. The message, unread for the next several hours, was a kill order, quietly issued that same afternoon, naming a nurse at Ridgeline General as a confirmed target. Whoever had access to that hospital's security servers had moved faster than even Marcus expected, and the clock the team believed they still had was, in truth, already running out. Inside the hospital, Nora finished her final rounds of the evening, unaware of the message circulating 2 blocks away, though her instincts kept pulling her attention toward windows and doorways with a frequency she had not felt in years. She told herself it was simply an old habit resurfacing, harmless and manageable. Some quieter part of her recognized it for what it actually was, a warning her body understood before her mind fully caught up. She stopped by the nurse's station one last time before clocking out, scanning the room out of habit, cataloging exits, counting faces, noting who belonged and who did not. Everything looked ordinary. Everything felt wrong anyway. "You okay?" Priya asked, catching the look on her face. "You've got your 1,000-yard stare again." "Just tired," Nora said, forcing an easy smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Long day." Priya did not push, though she watched Nora a beat longer than usual as she gathered her things and headed for the staff exit, some quiet instinct of her own registering that something about tonight felt different from every other ordinary night that had come before it. Two of Marcus's men, positioned discreetly at opposite ends of the block, watched the same exit without knowing about the other set of eyes that had begun tracking it as well. A separate car, unmarked and unremarkable, idled at the corner with its headlights off, occupied by a man reviewing a photograph on his phone that matched Nora's employee badge photo almost exactly. None of them made contact that night. All three parties, for entirely different reasons, chose to watch and wait rather than move, each one convinced they still had time to choose the moment carefully. Only one of them was right. Nora left through the staff exit at the back of the building, the way she always did, cutting through the loading dock to the employee parking lot. Rain had started, thin and cold, tapping against the corrugated roof overhead. Marcus was waiting by her car, alone, hands visible, no weapon drawn. It was a message in itself. If he wanted her dead, she would already be dead, and both of them knew it. "You dropped that technique in a waiting room full of cameras?" he said, voice low and even. "That was either very brave or very careless." Nora's hand slid instinctively toward the pepper spray clipped inside her jacket. "I don't know you." "You knew Commander Ellis Ward," Marcus said. "You knew him well enough to keep his unit alive for 4 years before Damascus." The name hit her like a physical blow. She had not heard it spoken aloud in 5 years, and hearing it now in a stranger's mouth felt like a door swinging open onto a room she had spent 5 years bricking shut. "He's dead," Nora said, her voice steady despite the storm underneath it. "Everyone I served with is dead." "Everyone but you," Marcus said. "And him. He's alive, Nora. Barely. He's been running from the same people who set your unit up, and 2 nights ago they finally caught up to him." Nora's grip on her keys tightened until her knuckles went pale. "Why are you telling me this in a parking lot instead of just leaving me alone?" "Because he's bleeding out in a safe house 40 miles from here, and you're the only combat medic who can save him," Marcus said. "And because whether you like it or not, the same network that sold out your unit now knows exactly where you are." That technique in the waiting room went straight into hospital security footage, and hospital security footage does not stay private forever. Nora stared at him, feeling the ground she had stood on for 5 years quietly give way beneath her feet. Behind her, through the rain, she could see the glow of the hospital lobby, warm and ordinary, a version of her life she suddenly understood might not exist much longer. "If this is a trick to draw me out," she said, "you should know I will not go quietly." "I would expect nothing less from you," Marcus said, and for the first time, something that almost looked like respect crossed his face. "You have until midnight to decide. After that, it will not be my choice who finds you first." "Why should I trust anything you're telling me?" "You shouldn't," Marcus said honestly. "Not yet. Trust the coordinates instead. If I wanted you dead, this conversation would already be over." "That's not exactly comforting." "It wasn't meant to be comforting," Marcus said. "It was meant to be true. I've spent 3 years chasing rumors about a medic who was supposed to be dead. I'm not going to waste that by lying to you in a parking lot." Nora studied him carefully, cataloging his stance, his breathing, the way his hands stayed loose and open at his sides instead of near a weapon. Everything about his posture matched a man telling the truth, or a man who had trained himself well enough to fake it perfectly. She had met both kinds before, and the memory of guessing wrong once already 5 years ago, sat heavy and cold in her stomach. "If I go to that motel and it's a trap," she said quietly, more to herself than to him, "I need you to understand I will not make it easy for whoever is waiting there." "I'd expect nothing less," Marcus said again, and this time there was something almost gentle beneath the words. "For what it's worth, I hope you go. Not because of the mission. Because he's been waiting 5 years to know you're alive, and some debts are worth paying even when they're dangerous." "You keep talking about debts," Nora said. "What's yours in all of this? Why does a man who could be anywhere in the world spend 3 years chasing a rumor about a medic nobody could confirm was alive?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, rain collecting on his shoulders before he answered. "Ward pulled me out of a burning vehicle in my second deployment. I owe him more than I could repay in 3 lifetimes. When he asked me to find you, I didn't need a second reason." "That's loyalty," Nora said. "Not the same as debt." "Maybe not," Marcus admitted. "But it moves a person just as far." Something about the honesty in his voice settled a small, wary part of her that had been braced for a lie since the moment he first spoke her name. She still did not fully trust him. She trusted, at least, that whatever he wanted from her was not the kind of trap she had spent 5 years dreading. He walked away into the dark without looking back, leaving Nora standing alone in the parking lot with her heart pounding and her carefully built life cracking down the middle. She sat in her car for a long time before she started the engine, staring at her own hands under the dim dashboard light, the same hands that had saved a stranger's son that afternoon and once, years ago, had failed to save 6 men she loved like family. Rain streaked down the windshield, blurring the parking lot lights into long yellow smears. Somewhere behind that blur, Nora understood, was a version of her past that had never actually let her go, no matter how far she ran or how quietly she lived. She drove home with the radio off, replaying every word Marcus had said, weighing the risk of a trap against the weight of a name she had spent 5 years trying not to remember loving. At her apartment, she did something she had not done in 3 years. She pried up the loose floorboard beneath her bed and lifted out the locked metal box, setting it on the kitchen table without opening it, just looking at the small brass lock for a long while.
She thought about the promise she made to herself the day she buried this life, that she would rather stay a stranger to everyone than risk loving people only to bury them too. Looking at the box now, she understood that promise had never actually protected her from grief. It had only postponed it, and made her lonelier while she waited. At 11:47 p.m., 4 minutes before Marcus's deadline, Nora picked up a phone and typed a single word back to the unknown number. Coming. Then she put the box back under the floorboard, unopened, because whatever came next, she wanted to face it as the person standing in her kitchen that night, not the ghost sealed away beneath it. Before she left, she sat at her kitchen table and wrote a short note, folded it twice, and tucked it into an envelope addressed to Priya. She did not explain everything in it, only enough. If anything happens to me, it began, please know none of it was your fault, and none of it was ever really about this hospital. You made the last 5 years feel like an actual life instead of a hiding place. Thank you for that. More than you will ever know. She left the envelope in her locker, taped to the inside of the door where Priya would find it eventually, whether or not she ever needed to read it. It felt, in some strange way, like closing one door gently instead of letting it slam shut behind her the way Damascus once had. Driving out toward the coordinates that night, headlights cutting through steady rain, Nora rehearsed every possible version of what waited for her in that motel room. A trap. A test. A trick designed to finish what the ambush in the mountains had failed to finish 5 years earlier. She rehearsed her exits before she ever stepped out of the car, the way she had been trained to. Old fear and old discipline moved together now, no longer fighting each other the way they had for 5 quiet years, but working, finally, toward the same purpose.
Nora did not go home. She drove to the river trail instead, parked, and walked until the city noise faded into the sound of moving water. She thought about Eli Thompson's mother crying with relief. She thought about Commander Ward's voice from years ago, steady and certain, telling his unit that no one gets left behind on his watch, a promise she had believed with her whole heart until the day it seemed to fail all of them at once. She thought about the ambush. The smoke curled low across the rocks. The static on the radio that never resolved into anyone answering. She had told herself for 5 years that she ran because there was nothing left to save. Standing by the river now, listening to it move steadily past her regardless of what she decided, she understood a harder truth. She ran because she was afraid of what it would cost to try again. A memory surfaced, unwelcome and vivid, of the last time she saw her unit whole, laughing around a small fire the night before the ambush, Ward passing around a battered deck of cards, someone singing off-key just to make the others groan. She had not let herself remember their faces clearly in a long time. Standing alone by the river, she let herself remember all 6 of them, one at a time, and did not stop the tears when they came. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, a single set of coordinates and 4 words. Room 14, ask for Doc. She stared at the message until the screen dimmed on its own, then lit it again just to read the words a second time, as though they might change if she waited long enough. At 11 that night, she found herself parked outside a rundown motel on the edge of town, engine off, hands on the wheel, arguing with herself in the dark. She thought of every reason to drive away. A new city. A new name. The kind of disappearing she had already practiced once before, quiet and complete, leaving nothing behind for anyone to find. Then she thought of the boy in the waiting room, blue-lipped and terrified, and how doing nothing had never once been who she was, no matter how hard she tried to convince herself otherwise over the last 5 years. She stepped out of the car. Room 14 smelled like antiseptic and old blood. Commander Ellis Ward lay on a stripped motel bed, gray-faced, a hand pressed weakly against a wound in his side that had clearly been stitched by someone without proper training, the thread uneven and already pulling loose at one edge. Vance? he rasped, and something in his cracked voice made her throat tighten in a way 5 years of silence had never allowed. Knew you'd come. Don't talk, she said, already moving, already assessing, already the medic she had spent 5 years pretending she was not. Save your strength for being furious at me later for taking so long. Wasn't your fault, Ward managed, gripping her wrist weakly as she opened her kit. Damascus. None of it was your fault. We'll talk about that when you're not bleeding through motel sheets, Nora said, and focused everything she had left into her hands. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching her work with the same focused stillness that had betrayed her identity that afternoon. He's been asking for you since Damascus, he said quietly. He never stopped believing you made it out. I didn't make it out, Nora said without looking up, her hand steady inside the commander's wound despite everything screaming underneath her calm. Not really. I just kept walking. For the first time since the ambush, she let herself feel the full weight of 5 years of running, and instead of breaking her, it steadied her hands. By the time the sun rose through the motel's thin curtains, Commander Ward was stable, sleeping deeply for the first time in days, and Nora Vance understood there was no version of her life left that did not include finishing what Damascus had started. She sat in the motel chair by the window, watching the gray morning light spread slowly across the parking lot, and let Marcus fill in the pieces of the last 5 years she had missed. He told her how Ward had spent 2 years alone, moving between countries under false papers, always one step ahead of the syndicate, never once trying to reach her directly because he refused to lead danger back to whatever life she had managed to build. He kept a photo of the whole unit in his jacket the entire time, Marcus said quietly. Said if he ever got the chance to find any of you, he owed it to the others not to waste it. Nora's eyes stung, and she let them, no longer interested in performing the kind of composure that had kept her safe but had also kept her alone. I used to think surviving Damascus meant I was supposed to forget it, she said. I think I had that backwards. Most people do, Marcus said. Surviving something doesn't mean walking away from it. Sometimes it just means carrying it differently. When Ward woke briefly near midday, disoriented but stable, his first question was not about the syndicate, or the wound in his side, or how much danger they were all now in. His first question was whether Nora had found any peace in the years since Damascus. Some, she told him honestly, holding his hand while Marcus stepped outside to keep watch. Not enough, but some. That's a start, Ward said, and drifted back to sleep with the faintest exhausted smile on his face, as if her answer alone had been worth everything it cost him to ask the question. While he slept, Nora stepped outside onto the motel's cracked concrete walkway, needing air, needing distance from the room and everything it had unlocked in her. The rain had thinned to a mist, and somewhere beyond the parking lot a highway hummed steadily, indifferent to everything happening in room 14. She let herself remember Damascus fully for the first time in 5 years, not in fragments but in order. The mountain passes at dusk. The convoy stopped for a mechanical fault that later turned out to be sabotage. Ward's voice on the radio, calm even then, directing everyone toward the ridge for cover. The first explosion and the 4 that followed it. The name she called out into smoke that never answered back. She remembered carrying a wounded soldier named Castillo nearly a mile on her own back before losing him anyway, his weight impossibly light by the end, his voice going quiet somewhere along that final stretch of rock and dust. She had never told anyone that part. Not Ward. Not the mission debrief. Not even herself most days. You couldn't have saved everyone, Marcus said quietly, stepping out to join her, having clearly heard enough of her silence to guess where her mind had gone. I know that, Nora said. Knowing it and believing it aren't the same thing. No, Marcus agreed. They're not. But most people never even get as far as knowing it. That's not nothing. They stood together in the mist without speaking for a while, and for the first time in 5 years, Nora did not feel like she was carrying Damascus entirely alone. Can I ask you something? Marcus said eventually, breaking the silence. Why nursing? Out of everything you could have vanished into, why choose a job that puts you in the exact kind of crisis you were trying to leave behind? Nora considered the question honestly before answering. Because I couldn't figure out how to stop being useful, she said. I tried for about 6 months. Waiting tables. I worked at a bookstore. I was good at neither. But the first time someone collapsed in that bookstore and I got to them before anyone else even registered what was happening, I understood something about myself I couldn't unlearn. What's that? That hiding and disappearing aren't the same thing, she said. I could disappear into an ordinary life. I could never actually stop being the person who moves toward the emergency instead of away from it. Nursing let me keep that part of myself without anyone asking uncomfortable questions about where I learned it. Marcus nodded slowly, something like understanding settling into his expression. Ward used to say the same thing about you back before Damascus. Said you were the only medic he'd ever met who ran toward gunfire faster than the soldiers did. Old habit, Nora said, echoing the same two words she gave Priya most mornings, though this time they carried the full weight of everything behind them instead of deflecting it. They went back inside as the mist thickened into a steadier rain, and Nora checked on Ward once more before finally allowing herself an hour of uneasy sleep in the room's single worn armchair, her body finding rest even while some quiet part of her mind stayed permanently on watch, the way it always had since the mountains outside Damascus. She woke before dawn to the sound of Ward shifting in the bed, testing his strength, gritting his teeth against the pull of fresh stitches. You should still be resting, she said, moving to check his bandages. 5 years of resting, Ward said, managing a tired but genuine smile. I think I've had my fill for a while. You nearly died 2 nights ago. And you nearly disappeared 5 years ago, Ward said. We're both still here anyway. Feels like something worth getting out of bed for, even on a bad leg and half a working set of stitches. Nora laughed quietly despite herself, checking his pulse, his color, the steadiness returning slowly to his voice. You haven't changed. Neither have you, Ward said. Not where it counts. You still can't sit still when someone needs help. I used to worry that instinct would get you killed someday. Damascus almost proved me right. Turns out it's also the exact thing that's kept you alive ever since. The two of them sat quietly as the sun rose fully through the thin curtains, no longer strangers pretending 5 years apart had not happened, but not yet entirely the same people they had been before the mountains changed everything between them. Somewhere in that unfinished space, something steadier than either of them expected slowly began rebuilding itself. The syndicate that betrayed Nora's unit was not a myth or a rumor. It was a private network of former intelligence officers who sold classified troop movements to the highest bidder, and Commander Ward's unit had gotten too close to proving it, close enough that someone decided the whole team was worth erasing rather than exposing them. They tracked you through hospital surveillance, Marcus said the next morning, laying out a tablet showing security footage of Nora's cricothyrotomy on Eli, already flagged and forwarded through channels that should never have had access. By tonight they will know your address, your shift schedule, and your car. So we move first, Nora said. We move first, Marcus agreed, and something passed between them in that moment that was not quite trust yet, but was no longer suspect either. Over the following 2 days, Nora balanced a life she was no longer sure she could keep. She worked her shifts at Ridgeline General because disappearing suddenly would raise more questions than staying. She smiled at Priya. She checked in on Eli, who was recovering well, and drew her a crayon picture of a nurse with a cape, the word hero written above it in wobbly 7-year-old letters. You're my favorite nurse in the whole world, Eli told her seriously, handing over the drawing with both hands. You saved me like a superhero. I had good training a long time ago, Nora said, taping the drawing carefully inside her locker where no one else would see it. You were very brave too. Bravest patient I've had all year. At night, she trained again with Marcus in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, shaking rust-off skills she thought she had buried for good, relearning the woman she used to be one motion at a time. The warehouse smelled of dust and old motor oil, and the only light came from a single hanging bulb that swung gently whenever the wind pushed through a broken window. You still move like you did in the file footage, Marcus told her one night, watching her disarm a training knife from his hand in under a second. Old habits die slow, she said, breathing hard, a small smile breaking through for the first time in days. There was something quietly steady growing between them, something neither of them said out loud yet. He brought her coffee before dawn training sessions without being asked, always black, exactly the way she liked it, though she never remembered telling him that. She noticed the way his shoulders relaxed only when she was in the room, the way his eyes checked the exits first and her second, always in that order, as if her safety mattered to him almost as much as the mission did. When this is over, he said one night, closer to her than either of them had planned, rain drumming softly on the warehouse roof, I would like to know the version of you that isn't running from anything. I'd like to meet her too, Nora admitted quietly, and for a moment the danger circling them both felt very far away. I'm not sure she exists anymore. I think she's closer than you believe, Marcus said. I saw her yesterday actually. She laughed at something Priya said and forgot to check the door for 4 whole seconds. Nora laughed despite herself, surprised by how easily it came. You counted. I count everything, he said. Occupational habit. For a moment neither of them spoke, the space between them smaller than it had been a minute earlier, both of them aware of it and neither one moving away. On the third night, a black sedan idled outside her apartment for 11 minutes before driving away. On the fourth, someone tried her locker room door with a key that should not have existed, the lock scratched but not broken, a warning rather than an attempt. The syndicate was closing in, and Nora understood the quiet chapter of her double life was ending. Whatever came next would happen in the open, in front of everyone, with nowhere left to hide behind a badge and a borrowed name. Priya noticed something was different long before Nora said a word about it. "You've been looking over your shoulder for 2 days," she said, cornering Nora in the break room with 2 cups of coffee and a look that would not accept deflection. "And don't tell me it's nothing, because I've watched you handle actual emergencies without blinking. This is something else." Nora hesitated, weighing 5 years of habit against the exhaustion of carrying it alone. "It's complicated," she finally said. "Old work. Older than this hospital. I can't tell you everything, but I need you to trust that I'm not putting anyone here in danger on purpose." "Is it dangerous for you?" Priya asked, quieter now, all teasing gone from her voice. "Maybe," Nora admitted. "Then whatever you need," Priya said, gripping her arm once, firm and certain. "You ask. I mean it. You've spent 5 years covering everyone else's shifts and everyone else's mistakes. Let someone cover for you for once." It was such a small offer, and it nearly undid Nora more than the gunfire outside her apartment had. She realized, standing in that break room, that she had spent 5 years so focused on protecting people from her past that she had forgotten how much strength there was in simply letting them stand beside her instead. That same evening, a near miss forced the timeline forward faster than anyone on Marcus's team expected. A man posing as a hospital vendor tried to badge into the staff corridor using a cloned credential, only to be stopped by a sharp-eyed security guard who noticed the badge photo did not quite match the delivery uniform. "They're not waiting anymore," Marcus said grimly, reviewing the footage later that night in the warehouse. "They're testing the building's weak points. That means they already know she's inside more often than not, and they're deciding how they want to come in." "Then we stop letting them choose the ground," Nora said, studying a rough sketch of the hospital's parking structure that Marcus had pinned to the wall. "If they're going to move on me, I want it somewhere I know every angle of, not somewhere they do." "That's a dangerous kind of confidence," Marcus said. "It's not confidence," Nora said. "It's the only kind of ground I have left to choose. I'll take known danger over unknown danger every time." Marcus studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, before nodding once, slow and certain. "Then we make sure known ground works in your favor instead of theirs." They spent the following 2 nights running drills specific to the parking structure itself, using a borrowed floor plan and chalk marks on the warehouse concrete to simulate every pillar, ramp and blind corner. By the second night, Nora could navigate the layout with her eyes closed, counting steps between cover points the way she once counted paces on patrol, old training and new purpose finally moving as one. Between drills, Marcus taught her small things about the years she had missed, the names of new allies, the shifting shape of the syndicate's operations, the slow, careful work Ward had done from the shadows trying to expose them without getting killed in the process. In return, Nora told him about her sister, about the bookstore job that hadn't worked out, about the strange, small comfort of learning a stranger's coffee order and getting it right every single morning for a year. "You remembered my order the second day," Marcus said during a break, both of them leaning against the warehouse wall, breathing hard from a sparring round. "Nobody does that unless they're paying more attention than they're letting on." "Occupational habit," Nora said, echoing his own words back at him with a small smile. "I notice things about people. It's how I keep them alive." "Is that the only reason?" Marcus asked, quieter now, watching her carefully. Nora did not answer right away, and the silence between them said more than either of them was ready to put into words yet. "Ask me again after this is over," she finally said, "when I'm not worried it'll get you killed to care about the answer." "Fair enough," Marcus said, though the look on his face made it clear the question had not gone anywhere, only paused, patient and waiting, the same way he had waited 3 years to find her in the first place. On the final night before the ambush that would change everything again, Nora slept only a few hours, running through the parking structure layout one more time in her mind, every pillar, every blind corner, every possible way the night ahead could go wrong, and a few of the ways she allowed herself to hope it might finally go right. Earlier that evening, Ward had joined them briefly at the warehouse, still moving carefully but steady on his feet, leaning against a stack of old crates while he watched Nora and Marcus run their final drill together. "You two move well together," he observed, arms crossed, something knowing in his tired smile. Better than most partners I've fielded, and I fielded a lot of partners. It's just training, Nora said, slightly too quickly, and Ward's smile only widened. Sure it is, he said, exchanging a brief, amused glance with Marcus, who suddenly found something very interesting to check on his equipment vest. Whatever helps you both sleep at night. Nora shook her head, fighting a smile of her own, and returned her focus to the chalk-marked concrete, though something warm and unfamiliar lingered in her chest for the rest of the evening, a feeling she recognized distantly from a version of her life she thought she had lost the right to feel again. Ward left before midnight, promising to keep himself hidden and safe while the two of them handled what came next, and for the first time since Damascus, Nora watched someone she loved walk away without the crushing certainty that she would never see them again. It happened on a rainy Thursday night at the end of Nora's shift, in the multi-level parking structure behind Ridgeline General. She heard the first shot before she saw the shooter, a round shattering her driver's side window as she reached for the door handle. She dropped low on instinct, rolling behind a concrete pillar as more suppressed fire chipped stone inches from her head, dust and grit stinging her cheek. 6 of them, upper level, moving in a standard sweep formation. Marcus's voice came through the small earpiece she had started wearing without fully admitting to herself why. I'm 2 minutes out. I don't have 2 minutes, Nora said, already moving, counting exits, counting cover, counting the seconds between each burst of gunfire the way she had been trained 2 years ago. What followed was not the panicked scramble of a nurse caught off guard. It was the calculated, controlled work of a combat medic who had spent 5 years pretending she had forgotten how to fight, and had forgotten nothing at all. She used the dark and the rain the way she once used Desert Nightfall, disabling the first attacker with a precise strike to a nerve cluster in his shoulder before he even registered she had moved. The second she disarmed with his own weapon, turning his momentum against him and dropping him to the wet concrete with a controlled sweep of her leg. She's not running, one of the mercenaries shouted into his radio, disbelief clear in his voice. She's hunting us. A third attacker rounded a pillar too quickly, and Nora used the narrow space against him, pinning his weapon arm against the concrete until it clattered uselessly to the ground. He swung with his free hand, and she absorbed the blow on her forearm, gritted her teeth through the sting, and answered with a strike that put him down hard and did not let him back up. Marcus arrived in the middle of the fourth exchange, taking down 2 more attackers with the same brutal efficiency, fighting beside her instead of for her, exactly the way she needed. Their movements fell into rhythm almost instantly, each covering the space the other left open, years of separate training somehow speaking the same language. Left side, Nora called, and Marcus moved without question, trusting her instincts the way she had once trusted Ward's, the way real teams trusted each other without needing to ask why. The final man standing was the Syndicate's field handler, the one who had given the order to burn Damascus 5 years earlier. He recognized her face in the parking garage lights, and for one long second, real fear crossed his expression, the kind of fear that comes from finally meeting the consequence you spent years assuming you had outrun. You were supposed to die in those mountains, he said, breathing hard, backing toward the stairwell. I did, Nora said quietly, disarming him with a controlled sweep that ended with him pinned against the concrete, breathless and beaten. The version of me who let people like you win. She's the one who died there. You have no proof of anything, the handler spat, still trying to bargain even flat on his back with her knee against his shoulder. I don't need proof, Nora said. I need you to stay right there until the people who do need proof arrive. For a moment it seemed finished, until a 7th shape emerged from the stairwell shadows behind Marcus, a sniper who had been positioned on the upper ramp the entire fight, patient and unseen, waiting for a clear shot that the chaos below had finally given him. Marcus down? Nora shouted, already moving, throwing herself into him with enough force to knock them both behind a parked delivery truck as a round sparked off the concrete exactly where he had been standing. You good? Marcus asked, breathless, checking her over on instinct before checking himself. Better than you'd have been a second ago, Nora said, already scanning the upper ramp for the muzzle flash. Cover me. She moved low and fast along the truck's length, using its bulk as a shield, timing her sprint to the exact rhythm between the sniper's shots the way she had once timed movement across open desert under real fire. She reached the base of the stairwell, took it 2 steps at a time, and closed the distance before he had a chance to reposition. The struggle that followed was short and brutal, ending with the sniper disarmed and pinned against the stairwell railing, his rifle clattering down 2 flights before hitting the ground floor with a hollow, final clang. That's everyone, Marcus said into his radio, jogging up to join her, still catching his breath. The structure's clear. He looked at her for a long moment, rain plastering his hair flat, a thin cut above one eyebrow from the earlier struggle. "You saved my life twice tonight," he said. "Once when you threw yourself into me and once when you didn't hesitate going up those stairs after him." "Seemed like the least I could do," Nora said, breathing hard, adrenaline still moving fast through her hands, "considering you spent 3 years finding me first." "I'd call it even," Marcus said, "except I don't think either of us is keeping score anymore." Below them, red and blue lights began pooling against the concrete walls of the lower levels, and the sound of running boots and shouted commands rose up through the stairwell as local police finally reached the structure. "We should get down there," Nora said, though neither of them moved right away, both still catching their breath in the sudden quiet after so much noise, rain falling steadily around them, washing the last of the tension slowly from the night air. Detectives spent the better part of 2 hours taking statements once the scene was secured, and Nora answered every question with the same calm, measured honesty she brought to every hospital shift, careful about which details belonged to tonight and which belonged to a past still officially classified. "You saved that boy's life last week too," one of the detectives said, flipping back through his notes, connecting pieces that were only just beginning to make sense to him. "That's not a coincidence, is it?" "No," Nora said simply. "It isn't." She did not owe him the rest of the story, and he seemed to understand that some version of the truth in front of him was bigger than a single interview could hold. He closed his notebook, thanked her for her cooperation, and let her go without pressing further, the way people sometimes do when they sense they have brushed up against something larger than their job description. By the time Nora finally reached her car, its shattered window now taped over with a sheet of plastic someone from the crime scene unit had offered her, the rain had softened into a light, steady drizzle. Marcus walked her the last few steps, quiet now, the adrenaline of the fight fully drained from both of them, replaced by the kind of tired stillness that follows survival. Police sirens echoed up through the parking structure minutes later, called in by Marcus's team the moment the fight began. The handler and his surviving men were taken into custody, the first real evidence in years against a network that had ruined lives from the shadows for far too long. Nora stood in the rain afterward, soaked through, her hands finally still, looking at the hospital badge clipped to her scrubs. She unclipped it slowly and held it in her palm, not with regret, but with a quiet kind of gratitude for the version of herself it had allowed her to become again. "You don't have to choose one life over the other," Marcus said, coming to stand beside her, rain dripping from his jaw. "Ward is already talking about rebuilding a unit that actually protects people instead of covering for men like that one. He wants you leading the medical side. On your terms this time." Nora looked down at the badge, then up at the hospital where a boy named Eli was likely asleep in his own bed tonight because she had refused to look away from a stranger in pain. "Maybe I don't have to disappear to do both," she said. She clipped the badge back onto her scrubs. "For what it's worth," Marcus said, quieter now, "I'm glad the version of you that laughs and forgets to check the door made it out of those mountains too." Nora looked at him for a long moment, rain running between them, and let herself smile without guarding it for the first time in 5 years. "Buy me a coffee sometime that isn't at 4 in the morning before training, and we'll see how much more of her you get to meet." "Deal," Marcus said, and for once neither of them was thinking about exits or threats or the past waiting behind them, only the quiet, steady possibility of what came next. 3 weeks later, Nora Vance still worked shifts at Ridgeline General, still ran the river trail at sunrise, still brought soup to patients with no one visiting them. But she no longer hid the metal box under her floorboard. Some nights Marcus was there when she opened it, listening as she finally spoke the names of the men she had lost in Damascus out loud for the first time in 5 years, one name at a time, until the room felt lighter instead of heavier for having said them. Priya noticed the change first, the way Nora laughed more easily, the way she stopped flinching whenever a door opened suddenly. "Whoever this new guy is," Priya said one afternoon, nodding toward the coffee sitting untouched on Nora's desk, "still warm, still black, still exactly right. I like what he's doing to you." "So do I," Nora admitted and meant it completely. Commander Ward visited the hospital himself 2 months later, walking with a slight limp but standing straighter than Nora had seen him stand in years. He found her on her lunch break, sitting on a bench outside near the pediatric wing, watching a group of kids chase each other across the small courtyard garden. "New units coming together," he said, sitting down beside her. "Small. Careful. The kind that actually protects people instead of getting used by them. The medical lead position is still open if you decide you want it eventually. No pressure and no deadline this time." "I like my hospital," Nora said, watching a small boy in the courtyard nearly trip over his own shoelaces before catching himself and laughing about it. "I like this life too much to give all of it up." "Then don't give it up," Ward said simply. Just don't hide the other part of yourself again either. We already tried that. Didn't work out well for either of us. Nora smiled, and for the first time since Damascus, the two parts of her life did not feel like separate people fighting for the same body. They felt, finally, like one whole person who had simply been carrying too much alone for far too long. That weekend, she finally called her sister back, sitting on the small balcony of her apartment with the phone pressed to her ear and the sound of the city settling into the evening around her. She did not tell her everything, not yet, but she told her enough that her sister went quiet on the other end of the line for a long moment before saying, softly, that she was proud of her, and that the old room was still ready whenever she wanted to use it, even just for a visit. Maybe next month, Nora said, and meant it, something in her voice lighter than it had been in years. I'll hold you to that, her sister said, echoing without knowing it, the exact words Priya had used weeks earlier, and Nora laughed quietly at the small, strange comfort of being held to promises again, by people who actually expected her to keep them. On her next morning run along the river trail, she did not count her breaths out of an old survival habit. She counted them because the rhythm still felt good, steady in hers, chosen now instead of only necessary. The fog sat low over the pines the way it always did, and for the first time in 5 years, Nora did not feel like she was running from anything behind her. She was simply running toward whatever ordinary hard-won life waited for her at the end of the trail, and for once that was more than enough. The lesson in Nora's story was never really about tactics or danger. It was about the cost of hiding who you are out of fear, and the quiet courage it takes to let the people around you see your whole truth, scars included. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not fight in the parking garage. It is choosing, afterward, to stop running and finally let themselves be fully known. If this story keeps you hooked, subscribe so you never miss the next one, and comment below telling me where you're watching from. I would truly love to say hello and find out just how far our story has traveled.